Most school leaders spend their careers climbing a system that was never designed for the kids it was supposed to serve. Pablo Villavicencio grew up in East LA in a neighborhood where the local school had a 49% graduation rate. His parents falsified their address so he could attend school 30 miles away. And that detour, or that workaround, is what got him to UC Berkeley, into teaching, and eventually back to the same exact community he grew up in, now as CEO of Alliance College Ready Public Schools, a network of 25 schools serving 12,500 kids in Los Angeles. His schools graduate 96% of their students, 89% are college ready, and staff retention sits at 91% without tenure. The system didn't do that, the beliefs did. And that's what today's conversation cuts to the bone on. Pablo leads from a place most administrators never reach, a deep, unshakable conviction that every kid can learn, and then builds everything else around that. The culture, the wraparound services, the master schedule, the staffing model, all of it traces back to these beliefs. So the question is, do you actually believe it? Or do you just say you do? I'm Dan Watt, and this is Better Leaders, Better Schools, the original Ruckus cast for visionary leaders who want to do school different, even within a traditional system, so that students are excited to be at school and learn. Thanks to Ruckus makers like you, this podcast ranks in the top 1% of over 4 million worldwide podcasts. So once again, thanks for listening, and we'll be right back after a quick message from our show's sponsors.
For over 30 years, ODP Business Solutions has helped schools transform from whiteboards to smartboards. Why? Because when you get the right tools, everyone wins. Visit odpbusiness.com/education to revolutionize your school's learning spaces. It's odpbusiness.com/education. If you're making decisions about staffing, student support, or operations this year, having the right context matters. Frontline Education's 2026 K-12 Lens Report shows where pressures are easing, where they're not, and how districts are responding. It's based on insights from 1,000 school leaders across the country. Visit frontlineeducation.com/leaders to uncover insights from over 1,000 school leaders across the country. Over 1 million teachers rely on IXL because it's empowering, it helps them make better decisions with reliable data, and it adapts instruction based on student performance. You can get started today at ixl.com/leaders. That's ixl.com/leaders. A principal I work with walked into her staff meeting last week with one clear next move on the culture problem she'd been circling for months. She didn't get there alone. She got there with Digital Danny. He's always there, never forgets, and he evolves with you. Get started with Digital Danny at myprincipalcoach.com/ruckus. That's myprincipalcoach.com/ruckus.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Watt, and I'm here with Pablo Villavicencio, and we're getting ready to kick off another edition of the Better Leaders, Better Schools Ruckus Cast. So welcome, listeners. And Pablo, I thought maybe we could start today by you introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Dan, for having me on the podcast, and to all your listeners. Appreciate the space just to be here and share my story, my perspective. So I'm from Los Angeles. My parents are immigrants from Ecuador, and we came as very typical immigrant story, came with the hopes of a better education, more opportunity for me and my brother. And we landed in Los Angeles in the northeast corner called El Sereno, and really had sort of a subpar educational experience in our local public school that really didn't reflect a deep belief that all kids can learn. I think that really shaped a lot of my life later on. And my parents made the tough decision to falsify my address to go to a really great suburban school about 30 miles outside of where we lived. And that experience and sort of the education I received afforded me the opportunity to go to UC Berkeley and then enter teaching through Teach for America. And I've now been in education for nearly 25 years.
Wow. And in our intro call, you talked a little bit about your first teaching experience in Harlem. Could you tell our audience a little bit about that?
Yeah. So my first placement of a school was in Harlem, in a school that was really viewed as a dumping ground. And I don't use that word lightly, for kids who had not been successful in a very large district, the New York City Department of Education. And this is in the
Yeah.
early 2000s. And so I had a class of about 39 sixth graders, and a third of them were over the age of 14. And I'd say the vast majority were not coming reading at a grade level. And so this was often viewed as the last ditch effort for kids, and not a place that had a deep sense of belief of kids either. And spent a lot of time trying to do my best. I was a brand new teacher, teaching is such a hard craft. But I think what I learned was really the need to love kids and to create safe spaces for them that allowed me to make some, real gains with our kids that year. But more than anything, really taught me that school wasn't a good place for kids. And so there was a group of us that had come in from Teach for America and a few long-term district teachers who began to organize and advocate for better conditions for our kids. And ultimately what that led towards was that school being closed down that following year as a result of, I think, not just the advocacy that we had done, but a part of a larger reform change that was happening to make a difference in New York City schools with better outcomes and smaller schools. It was part of the small school movement, but taught me a lot as a first year teacher in those conditions and advocating for what eventually became the school closure.
Mm-hmm. What happened to those kids?
They were, as in most school closures, they were transitioned into schools that had better outcomes. And so they wouldn't all stay together. And of course, it was a middle school between the ages of sixth grade to eighth grade. With the existing kids were sent to a variety of different schools. I know there was also an effort to put them into schools that had new growing charter schools and other schools in the area that I think were trying to drive towards better results for kids, a better educational quality for kids. I didn't keep track with those kids. So my hope is that they landed in schools that were able to sustain them beyond the initial placement that they had. But this was an uphill battle in conditions that were really difficult. So I think about those kids often.
I bet you. Well, and I bet you haven't had a class with 39 kids in it since then either.
Well, unfortunately, my following year, my class was 35 kids. So this was back in the 2000s. Classes were huge, and they were trying to make a lot of fiscal reality. I think in Los Angeles, where I'm currently at, classes got up to 40. Now, of course, that doesn't account for chronic absenteeism or attendance issues, but that unfortunately was not normal for lots of teachers at that time in urban centers.
And how did those early experiences shape you as an educator?
I mean, I think it really confirmed this deep held belief that kids need safe places where they feel loved and seen. And I think that even emerged to understand how important creating spaces where their identities are affirmed to be not only show up for themselves in that classroom, but also in a space where they're able to, I think, get to a place where they are invested in their own education. And ultimately what you want is to give them an innate sense of wanting to learn that lots of kids learn, like actually deprogram themselves from. They become like apathetic, the middle school and the high schools. And so continuing to nurture that and continue to kindle that, I think what all good educators do, it made me realize that you have to have a personal relationship, but you have to create a lot of structure in the classroom in order to enable that.
Which is tricky to do with 34 or 39 kids.
Tricky, but not impossible. I really, it was funny enough that first year, I have a lot of like sad moments in my teaching, but I think by the time February came around, kids knew that I wasn't going to go anywhere and I was really trying to love them. And kids responded to me differently. And, even with that many kids, that's not the ideal. I think obviously smaller class sizes are ideal, which is what we have here at Alliance. But regardless of that, having an invested adult made a dramatic difference for kids who just wanted the stability and wanted to know that they had someone who cared in front of them every day.
Mhm. So we don't want to jump the shark too early here, but you haven't talked about Alliance yet, and I'm curious how those formative years for you influenced your work eventually at Alliance, or how did you get from there to where you are now?
Yeah, so I think as a result of that first year, I was looking for another school that was a turnaround situation, but had enough investment from their leadership, because that was the other lesson I learned. The leadership at the first school wasn't as invested. It was a leadership, you don't have supported principals or assistant principals or even the infrastructure to care. And I don't think these were bad human beings. They had kind
Mhm.
of given up. And there was a high level of incompetence and a high level of apathy at the leadership level, which I think a lot of district schools in the early 2000s were experiencing after generations of not getting results and a lot of other policies that led towards low outcomes for kids. And so I was looking for a school, found that in the Bronx in a great middle school that had actually just been going through their own challenges, but had a principal and a team of adults that cared. And then spent 4 years with that school, helping turn around that school from pretty poor results to good results and really helping transform that culture of that school. And that afforded me the opportunity to eventually open up a high school for the same group of kids that I was serving, which were English language learners, often coming into the country later on in their educational career in the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth grade years, coming with low levels in their native language. And so opened up a high school in the Bronx, spent 5 years doing that and had the most amazing experience. Being a principal was definitely where I want to end my career again. But built a school for a group of kids that had a low probability of graduating from high school, and then created a model that was a wraparound service. We focused on love, we focused on a high quality of education, and then we focused on a lot of wraparound services that affirmed their identity and got some really incredible outcomes for our group of kids that in our first graduating class, 66% of them graduated, where they had a 10% graduation rate. And then their 6 year graduation outcome, I believe, was 88%. Well, got sick, had to come back to California, and then landed in district work in San Francisco and Oakland Unified, overseeing as a principal supervisor high schools in San Francisco, and then overseeing innovation as deputy chief of innovation in Oakland. And that was really a learning curve for me in regards to understanding the complexities of what it means to turn around a large system and a system with, chronic issues that were really dealing at the systemic infrastructure issue, not just at the unit of change of the school, which is still the most powerful unit. You really can make a huge difference at a school level with the right level of the right leadership and the right investment of adults, and then was trying to do so at a system level by building relationship with schools and helping build leadership pipelines that really empower leaders to be able to make those changes. And at the time, I became kind of concerned that this was going to be really hard to do at the district level because of a lot of just political interest of adults and very few conversations around kids and what was best for kids. And I had someone reach out to me about Alliance. It was my first charter experience. Not have much experience with charters. I had coming from the district world, and in many ways have been steeped into a rhetoric that there was this district charter divide, and but had become very disillusioned with what really drives me: the impact and systemic change. And was offered an opportunity to be part of a charter system that was actually in the neighborhood that I grew up. So I could have had a school that had offered me a great education that didn't require me
Mhm.
to falsify my address and go 30 miles out. And so really fell in love with the community of schools that I'm part of now. And so I've been with Alliance for the last 8 years as a chief of schools originally, then the president, and now the CEO.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
What a journey. And to right back to your neighborhood, that's interesting to me because another thing that you mentioned in our intro call was about sustaining results in a hyper local system.
Yep.
And it's beautiful how you went full circle all the way across to the East Coast and back again. And I'm curious how you sustain what you've learned and how you bring that back to your local.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, we talked a lot about the fact that I ultimately believe large bureaucracies or large systems will never fully get the results that are needed for hyper community, like for local context, because those closest to the impact that you're hoping to have are not at the decision-making table. And ultimately what you want is to have empowered individuals that understand the context that they're working in and that they're serving in, to be able to make those decisions. And of course, there are things that a large system brings, but really as a CEO, we're trying to figure out is like what needs to be universal, because it's what's really good practice and it sets the bar or the floor for our communities, and where do we get out of the way to allow that autonomy and to help schools actually drive the results that they need based on the context that they're experiencing. And so, and charter law was meant to do that, to create innovation that allowed for different kind of results. And I think Alliance has always been great at trying to figure out what works at the hyperlocal level that gets these really incredible results compared to our local schools. And so not only just on graduation rates from high school, which we superseded a long time ago. When Alliance was founded, it was because LAUSD had a graduation rate of 49% from high school. That it wasn't even for college readiness. That was just to graduate from high school with a pretty low bar, since we don't have rigorous exit exams in California from high school. And so, quickly within 4 or 5 years, our graduation rates were at 95 and 96%. And our numbers of kids with special education and multi-language learners is the same. So I know there's always a perception that we might be taking some of the best kids. We're like, we actually serve a higher level of kids with special needs in many of our schools, and at least on the same level of kids for multi-language learners. And so, which was a non-negotiable for me when I entered into a charter space. And so I think the innovation that has allowed us to do that and the kind of results that's driven has come from a place of figuring out how do we create these containers at the local level that can be responsive to the needs, while beginning to really set the floor for quality practices across our schools.
And not a small charter organization. As I recall, there's like 45 schools in Alliance or something like that.
You're right. I forget the context. And sometimes some of your listeners might be coming from districts, like the district of my high school have, a handful of schools. We have 25 schools with 25,000 alumni now, and 12,500 kids in our system.
Wow.
And we're secondary, a 6 through 12 model.
It'd be interesting. I don't know if you do this, but it'd be interesting to capture what those kids do after Alliance. Like how many of them go on to the trades and how many of them go on to post-secondary?
Well, we are a college, it's Alliance College Ready Public Schools. And our model became to not just have kids graduate from high school, but to be prepared for AFG requirement, which is sort of like college ready indicator in California. And so we know that about 87% of our kids go to a 2 or 4 year college, and our persistence rate right now through that 4-year university is about 37%. And so for our demographic of kids, which are predominantly coming from free and reduced lunch from some of the most marginalized communities in our Los Angeles area, and have, it's a 9 to 12% persistence rate for our demographics. Clearly we're 3.5 times the national average for our kids persisting through college. And so we know that most of our kids go to college. Most of them don't graduate from college, but they are graduating from college at a much higher rate. And so what we've been trying to do is to actually ensure what else can we do to better set up their success rates to persist through college, so that we make sure that they're in the right place. And we've also begun to do work. What we know is a group of kids who college is not the right fit. And what kind of trade experiences or other experiences can they receive, while understanding that we're not a very large system. So offering full CTE vocational training, which is very capital intensive to do right, isn't the right fit for us, right? We are in the name attracting families that potentially want to go to college, but that we can begin to do other things that better set them up for success. And when I first started in the system 8 years ago, our college persistence rate was around in the high teens, low 20s. And so we've done a lot of work to actually ensure that over the course of time, the type of experience that our scholars receive in our 25 schools is something that is better supporting them in their journey to persist through college.
It'd be an interesting experiment to consider, what do you do with those kids who get partway through their school journey with you and realize maybe college isn't the direction they want to go, and how to plan differently for that cohort of kids. Well, maybe not cohort, but you know what I mean? That population.
Yeah.
Could there be cross enrolling?
And I think there's a group of, one of the things that we have amazing people who work here, amazing people who work at our school sites. And there are folks who are trying to think that, which is why we begun to pilot, which is one of the benefits of a charter. You really can pilot things. And so we're beginning to pilot pathways for kids that start, in the 10th grade to say, okay, can you explore something else? It's also couples with the work that we're doing around middle college or early college. And so that kids leave with an associate's degree, at least by the time they graduate college, or having done their first 2 years of college in the California systems, the UC and Cal States. And so we've begun to pilot that, which is one of the benefits of charter schools, where we're able to try these different things and see if we're getting different outcomes for kids who may have been encouraged to go to college, but might have been better served by just having the certification or other sort of technical skills that come as a result of just needing an associate's degree at least.
Well, and it speaks to that topic we touched on earlier about overcoming siloed thinking. How does Alliance grow in that regard?
I think it's hard. It's easy as a system for you to think about because we believe in the local. There is obviously this tension between the hyperlocal and it becoming siloed, where schools are doing something different. But not just at the school level. This is common of districts, and I'm sure district divisions become siloed, and people are not speaking to each other. And as a principal and as a school leader, you're receiving conflicting information that are not speaking to one another, and therefore make your job difficult because you're often required to implement things that are in contradiction or in tension with one another. And I wish I could say we've liberated ourselves completely from that as our system. That's not the truth, because some of your listeners might be my principals who are going to quickly send me a chat afterwards to say that is not the case. But we have done a lot to de-silo that work. And that really comes to ensuring that our school leaders understand what our priorities are and understand what are the practices that are essential for running good schools. And so through building the sort of the skill set of our principals to understand the vision, but also understand here are the structures and systems that support that vision that you're going to place at your school, and then being intentional about how they plan for that or around that. Sometimes I would say with some principals, they're able to say, okay, here's what I'm trying to do and adapt that into my school. Here's how this makes sense. Here's how that drives towards that result. Here's how I have to layer on this innovation that really matters to me. Because even there are innovations that are happening at the school level, but there's also innovations that are happening at the network level that just require a few of our schools. So one of those innovations is making sure that we actually, to me, the craft of teaching requires dedicated time that is unfortunately not funded for in most funding models from states. And you see countries like Finland or South Korea, where they're given 50% planning time because they understand that the intentionality required to drive towards scholar outcomes is a big lift. And here in America, we just give them maybe 10% of our time is given towards that. And that 10%, having been a teacher, is usually like I'm covering for another teacher. I have a meeting. So you're left to do that after hours. And, there was a period of time where many of us relied on this as being a mission-driven role, that we were going to go above and beyond. And my entire Sundays, when my friends were having Sunday fun days, was spent me planning. And that way of thinking, in that sense of I'm going to sacrifice my work-life balance or my family's commitments, is a model that was really put into question during the pandemic, and probably have been put into question for a long period of time, but definitely in the pandemic. That it became clear with differences in the way that generational shifts about work are happening. And some of us are reprioritizing even as we're older, and I'm Gen X, became like, this is a model that's not great. And I wish I had a magic wand to be able to give more funding for us, but we don't. So what we did is like, what's in our locus of control, the master schedule of a teacher, let's figure out what we can do. And so, the sort of like, so we now have about 7 schools that are trying to increase planning time by 8 to 12 hours a week, so that teachers have dedicated time to do the work that really gets them there. And that's happening at 7 schools, but the other schools are not. And so we have to figure out how to orchestrate across all those priorities and allow that to be a priority because it's so incredibly important. In addition to coming back to some of the basics, which has been really at the instructional core.
Mhm. You've touched on a couple of key points there, needs and solutions, working with multiple generations of teachers. I think it's been said this is the first time in history we've had 5 generations of teachers in the workplace.
Yep.
How is your organization tackling that?
Such a loaded question, Dan. Uh, I mean, I think ultimately what we're driving towards is first and foremost having a organization that has a shared identity and values, right? Because I think value is really when you articulate your values, and for us, it's growing together, pursuing excellence, and advancing equity. There's common language that allows us to talk about what we may be experiencing. Now, of course, everyone knows that's not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient. And so what we've done is to really make sure that one, we're casting a vision and making like, I think strong leaders need to say, here's what we stand for. Here's our vision. And you are joining an organization that we hope will keep us accountable to that, but know that when we make decisions, that's also what you're following for. And that makes it clearer. So that also probably self-selects certain people to join us and other folks who are just like, I might not be aligned to those values. Ultimately leave. We're also trying to do work on trying to help understand the larger context that we're in. So there's a lot of storytelling and strong leaders share narratives, and we try to share the narrative that's happening. So right now the narrative is that we're all in chaos. We're dealing a lot of education is under attack. Many of the communities that are in urban centers are under attack. And we're in a moment of deep like uncertainty or transition, depending on how you see it. And so and that has resulted in economic uncertainty, which is driving a lot of the realities that people are facing on the ground in their personal finances, because all of us have to go to the grocery store and know what we're experiencing. And in the educational landscape around layoffs, around mergers, around consolidations of schools, around having to like forego benefits that we've had in the past. And that's been really important narrative to share with folks so that they make sense of that. And then understanding that generational differences that exist in these larger generations that we have here may be experiencing those differently. And so what we have to do, one, is as a leader, I make sure that we have focus groups and advisory committees that try to have as broad of a voice of our stakeholders as possible so that we're hearing different perspectives. And honestly, that's where I see the biggest generational differences there. Two, that we're not placing value judgments as good and bad of the way that people are experiencing this, because that's still their reality. That's what they're experiencing. And I think that happens a lot. And that can often happen in both directions with like, Gen Alpha feeling a particular way about boomers or Gen X and vice versa, and not placing value statements around that and trying to really get to like, what are we trying to solve? When I share with teachers that we're trying to create more planning time, that isn't on a generation. Now, they may experience that differently, right? They definitely do experience that differently, but they all understand that there's a problem that the way we're structured and funded isn't serving sustainability in the role. It isn't really allowing them to really put forward their best practice in the classroom because their priorities are all over the place in trying to manage 90% instruction with all the other demands that come in teaching. You add on layers of that to not just differences in generation, but also employee groups, like the ways that your principals or your assistant principals may experience that challenge is different than a teacher or different than operational staff who's like, hey, what about my extra hours? I'm dealing with all these competing efforts. And so that you have to translate and make sense and try to be like, at the core, we're here to make sure that 75% of our scholars persist through college. We're here to provide a quality education. It's why we're one of the top performers. We're one of the top performing networks in the state of California. And so we have to prioritize scholar outcomes, what's close to scholar outcomes, and then help them walk through those decisions and the competing interests that naturally would come.
ODP Business Solutions, formerly Office Depot Business Solutions Division, has been a trusted partner for schools for 30 years. At ODP Business Solutions, we're by your side to meet your evolving education needs. Here's the thing about creating remarkable learning spaces. you need a partner who gets it. Someone who understands that transforming education isn't just about swapping whiteboards for smartboards. It's about reimagining what's possible. That's why innovative school leaders trust ODP Business Solutions. We don't just deliver supplies. We help you design dynamic learning environments that make students actually excited to show up. From tech integrations that bring lessons to life to flexible furniture that transforms any space into a collaboration zone, to sustainable solutions that teach by example, we've got everything you need to do school different. And the best part, you can get it all from a single supplier. That helps you simplify ordering and streamline budgeting while staying compliant with easy access to cooperative contracts. However you want to advance, ODP Business Solutions has 30 years of experience helping districts like yours get ahead. Visit odpbusiness.com/education to learn more. That's odpbusiness.com/education. With so much changing across K-12, it's not just about reacting, it's about making decisions that hold over time. Frontline Education's 2026 K-12 Lens Report brings together insights from over 1,000 school leaders to show what's shifting across staffing, operations, and student support. Learn where momentum is building and where districts are feeling the pressure by visiting frontlineeducation.com/leaders. You can get your full report at frontlineeducation.com/leaders. Something that drove me nuts as a ruckus maker was hearing teachers say things like, "I taught it, they should have learned it." But really, some teachers just don't know how to teach or reteach for that matter so that all kids get it. That's where IXL comes in. IXL's diagnostic automatically identifies knowledge gaps for teachers and provides them with a personalized growth plan for each individual student. Teachers can step into the classroom every day knowing what their students know and what they don't know. IXL's adaptive platform makes differentiating instruction easy. As students learn, IXL adjusts to the right level of difficulty for each student. Close knowledge gaps and accelerate learning with IXL. Get started today at ixl.com/leaders. That's ixl.com/leaders. I was talking with a principal last month who'd been wrestling with the same staff problem for 6 weeks. Every Monday, it was on her list. Every Friday, it was still there. She kept telling me she needed more information before she could make the call. Here's what she actually needed. She needed someone to ask her, if you already knew the answer, what would the answer be? That question cut 6 weeks of circling down to about 4 minutes. She made the move that afternoon. And that's the conversation Digital Danny is built for. He's your AI coach, trained on a decade of how I actually work with principals. And he's available the second you need him to think through something. You can get started with Digital Danny at myprincipalcoach.com/ruckus.
So, as the CEO, I love the values you stated, and I didn't capture them perfectly, but growing together, pursuing excellence, and achieving equity. Is that fair to say?
Advancing. I don't know if we're ever going to achieve equity, Dan. That's a big one. But each of us has a role of making sure we leave a little bit better and we help people. And equity to me is not about fairness. It's about making sure kids get what they need in order so that they're successful. And
Yes.
it looks different for different kids. And so that's where we said advancing. It was very intentional around that.
Yes, advancing. I like that choice of word. I also love the phrase that you used, creating a tidal wave in education. So, how do you get as many people as possible behind that as you create that tidal wave in education?
I think first you set the vision and you actually put a belief. I know it sounds so simple, Dan, but it goes back to what I learned that first year of teaching. Adults and kids sniff BS. And so you have to believe. You deeply believe that all kids can learn. And that's something that's been weaponized, like all kids can learn and whatever. But you have to
Mhm.
believe it. And then you have to set that in the system, all we're doing is in support of that deep belief that our kids can achieve incredible outcomes. And once you do so, once you set that vision, and of course you set structures and systems that support that vision, you have to ensure that every single school is a container or an environment that is going to be supportive of both kids and adults. And because people are translating the experience that they have in the school site, whether it matches with that vision and whether it matches with your values. And when there's disconnect, there's some folks who just like get frustrated and leave. There's other folks who begin to lower their own expectations, probably unconsciously at times. And that creates, I'd say, a downward trend of where schools should be, and then really impacts culture. And then I've already mentioned, you have to have adults in leadership positions across the system that reinforce those deep beliefs and that share the same approach as you. And so once you do so, you then have to create a sense of wanting to retain people and be there. And so look, we have 91% retention across all employee groups in Alliance. 91%. Wow. That is not common in the educational space. And we're not a place where there's tenured positions, where there's like, these are folks who are wanting to be here. The system wants them to be here. And we have a deep commitment because we make sure that we're trying to talk the talk and walk the walk. And so that's come from a lot of intentional efforts to deal with the issues that we're experiencing, ensuring that we're listening to folks. So I think what really matters is that once you've done that, you also create spaces where folks are able to be part of the improvement, the continuous improvement that's required from a school and from a system, and that they're invested and bought in. And some schools do that really well. Not all our schools do, but that's when I come in. I actually hold focus groups across all our schools. I expect our principals to do that. Their principals, supervisors, the instructional superintendents do that. And then I do that across every single one of our schools. And then I just say, tell me what's good and then tell me what's bad. And trust me, people tell me what's bad all the time. And I was like, okay, what can we change about this? What can we address? Here's the context of what's preventing that. Because some things, like I remember talking to kids stakeholders and they really wanted to change our nutritional provider. And I was like, constraints, I get it. The food is terrible. This is the worst thing. This is the hill you're going to die on. And then we gave them context and then we're like, and then they also helped us drive some solutions and be like, what if we did this? What if we offered that? So I actually believe it's a two-way street. So we're not just releasing. So the more you're invested, then people see, the school, the system that's listening to me. It's actually helping address the issues. It's not perfect because no system will be perfect. And systems are systems. No school will be perfect because schools are systems upon themselves. And so, but you do have a belief that at least there's a willingness to address that. And then at any point when there isn't leadership that's actually believing that, because sometimes, or there are cultural issues that become too large, you have to do that. You have to be like, okay, at the core, what are we trying to drive here? How do we get there? Who are the right people to be able to drive that? And that's also something as a system that you have to do in order to ensure that you're holding to these values, but also to leading towards really audacious outcomes when there's a general sentiment that it can't be done. There's been like a little bit of foregoing sometimes that this is even possible because the challenges seem so insurmountable and it's only getting more complex. Kids are not all right. Their social emotional needs are significantly larger. Social media has dramatically changed our culture and changed youth. And as we noticed, as we already talked about, there are a lot of changes in the workforce that are a recipe for very complex realities at the school level.
Well, it sounds like you're well on your way to those audacious outcomes you outlined. I'll bungle the exact stats, but we can go back and watch the replay. I think you said 93% retention?
91% retention. And that's across
91,
employee groups, yeah.
And an 88% graduation rate?
Our graduation rate from our high schools is 96%.
76?
Yeah, serving over 93 or 94% for a reduced lunch. So our outcome...
And college?
And our A through G, which is, it's the Barker, California, for how many of those are college ready. So like in LAUSD schools, that's somewhere around like 59%. We're 89% to 93% for A through G. So our schools, our leaders, our teachers, our support staff are doing amazing work Because
Mhm.
kids leave having the option to go to a UC or California State University. And our kids are persisting at 3.5 times the national rate through college because of the experience that they're having. Is it enough? No. Can we do more for those kids who probably college isn't the best path? Yes. And that's where some of our innovation work and we're community grant schools. We're all community schools now. So our 25 schools are really invested in trying to build these community pathways. Part of that work with the community pathways is understanding more youth development towards career readiness.
Well, a grad race are one thing, but persistence and the ability to solve problems,
Yeah,
that's
we
a
really
whole other episode.
and honestly, I think the quality of any quality education requires kids to have that experience where they're leaving like as whole adults formed, able to tackle the challenges. Now, whole adults at the age of 18 is a whole other conversation. But as ready and possible to challenge. And honestly, the world is so much more complex than when we left college. And the circumstances are not in the favor of a lot of our kids already. That's true across many demographic groups now. It's not easy to be a young person, regardless of where you come from, given just the inequity in our economic reality, the challenges of what it means to actually thrive in a workforce. It's dramatically changing and at the same rate of the industrial revolution with this AI change. And so we have to do our best to ensure our kids not just like resilient learners, not just like scholarly thinkers as part of our college profile, but we've been really focusing on like, how are you a powerful communicator? How do you navigate complex relationships? Because AI can't do that. You can do that as a human. So what is it? How are you a wellness seeker when modern world is really changing the way you think and feel? And what are you really doing to be this community advocate, this light in the world? Like you actually have a social responsibility to your community members, to this world. And so that community advocate piece is the other things we're like, and I think that those are key parts of what we define as college ready. And I think we're doing a good job. I think my hope is that we're on the path from good to great.
Good to great. Well, if we could just rewind the tape, I feel like you just articulated that one message on all school marquees: wellness seekers who are community advocates.
Yeah.
Dot dot dot.
So
If you could put a message on all school marquees around the world for a single day, what would your message be?
I mean, honestly, it comes back to this idea of loved. Like, I know this sounds so cheesy, Dan, but I really like you are worthy and you belong. And I know that like ultimately that is the key message I would leave for all the adults, because I think there is such a attack on a sense of like where I fit in this world. It's why we're seeing larger numbers of youth suicide. It's why we're seeing so much division. I think if that message of love, any way you want to iterate it, isn't quite there, then the message becomes like every kid can succeed. It's your job as an adult to ensure that happens. I mean, and I think those are the two messages, like this locus of control of adults. Like in so many ways, because us as adults are overwhelmed and we feel so disempowered. It's not easy to navigate like our political processes alone, regardless of where you stand it feels disempowering. We're kind of we're foregoing our responsibility to really like, and that worries me. And so the other message is around like, you actually have a lot of control in the world, not just you as a parent, which is critical. And it's a message for parents, by the way, as well, because so many parents are foregoing that responsibility because of the complexities of what it means to parent in this age, this time and age. And so, but also any adult in the community has a responsibility for that.
Thank you. And my next question is about designing your dream school from the ground up, which it sounds like you're doing.
I mean, yeah, and I did actually, and this is why I want to be a principal. I was a founding principal for a school, and what I did, I think at the core, the message of love, the message of affirming your identity, regardless of where you're coming from, and the message of high expectations. So those were critical to our mission statement. But what we did was we had a group of committed adults. We trained them up. We gave them a sense of shared responsibility for the cohort of kids. And then we created systems and structures that were wraparound services for kids around the social, emotional, and the academic domains. And in the academic domains, you had groups of teachers. We called it Kid Talk. And you would meet and this is a high school. So you had a lot of content teachers who came and really, really trying to drive content. And they would sit there with others and talk about, this is what Luis needs. This is what they would figure out how they can support each other, and they saw each other as resources to be able to drive that result and that experience and provide like a cohesive experience for the kid, and then get more information on how they can help in their particular classroom, make that happen. We then did wraparound services that provided family therapy and individual therapy. We partnered with Good Shepherd organization. We had access to like 6 at different times, either therapists or social workers, and they would do planning around that same sort of data. And we'll look, and then we'd had different times where those individuals met with academic folks and we talk about kids in general, and then figure out, hey, this root issue, the root cause of something is not, this kid is just lazy, doesn't want to work. This kid is feeling like this is really attached to the family structure. Can we get support? There's a lot of enabling behaviors or conflicting behaviors happening at home. They would go in family therapy. An amazing team, wraparound services, coupled with like, I think the bread and butter of data-driven instruction with adults that really cared, and a support and a community that really tried to nurture their identity and create coursework that nurtured their identity, which was really, really powerful to do for such a diverse group of kids who had such a low outcome or predictive outcome of how they're going to graduate. In New York State, which has rigorous exit exams, just like Massachusetts. And so I feel very confident that the kids left with like passing their 5 regents, doing really hard work and feeling loved and valued. And I'm in touch with a lot of those kids still. And, I go back and I was like, I could have done so much more. We could have really thought about this. Like that sense of joy of learning, like we didn't quite get to there. That sense of like creating I really do believe in project-based learning and helping kids understand how to navigate when, like, in many ways we create too many scaffolds that doesn't set them up for like, high school. For college. Those are the things that I wish I would have spent time on.
Of all the things we discussed today, what's the one thing you want a ruckus maker to remember?
You have so much power. You have such a high locus of control by really ensuring that you are a values-driven leader that has a clear vision, that is really being driven by your values. And so think about where your life comes from, and then create conditions by being innovative, by allowing people to thrive in their space, by having conversations with folks and hearing them. And the only way you're going to do that is if you're nourishing yourself, but you're also nourishing those individuals by being in relationship with them. Even principals, I have to remind them of this. Like, you have to be talking to your teachers and your kids on a regular basis. You have to be in a relationship. You have to have a pulse on the ground. Not just think that pulse is, like really be in a relationship and in community so that you're able to translate that back to that vision, to those values, and therefore then is able to put that into systems and structures that they get these kind of results where you're not only attracting people, but you're retaining them. Because some of us are really great at attracting folks, but are really not that great at retaining them by not setting this container that is consistent and stable and able to create those spaces of continuous improvement. And then others of us are really like, sometimes have a hard time attracting them. And then we create kind of safe spaces, but you're also not doing innovation. You're not really pushing the envelope. And I think the challenges of education are so dramatic right now that it requires us to continuously be improving. And yeah, that's what I'll leave with folks.
Well, thank you, Pablo. I'm standing here with my hand on my heart because I'm hearing you share about the need to love, to be in relationship, and to help foster a sense of belonging in our schools. And I really appreciate hearing that message today. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that.
Hey, Ruckus Maker. Thanks again for pressing play. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. One thing Pablo taught me is that even when we're pursuing audacious outcomes for our students, it all begins with a sense of love, a sense of belonging, and growing together. This matters because ruckus makers do school different. And if education ain't a bit disruptive, then what are the students really learning? Ruckus makers create a campus experience worth showing up for. And before you go, if today's episode sparked an idea or shifted your thinking, then I know you're going to love the Ruckus Maker Mastermind. It's a private community of innovative school leaders who meet weekly to grow, reflect, and disrupt the status quo. Create the campus experience your staff and students deserve. Applications are now open at betterleadersbetterschools.com/apply. And you can also subscribe to the Ruckus Maker newsletter. I hear they've got a really great author. 3 new opportunities to do school different each week, trusted by over 5,000 forward-thinking leaders. Join free at ruckusmakers.news. And finally, check out My Principal Coach, your AI-powered leadership mentor, trained on 10 years of mastermind and coaching experience. It's like having a world-class Ruckus Maker mentor in your pocket. Start your 7-day free trial at myprincipalcoach.com.